a chicken stelline soup, some 3 cheese grilled cheese with our leftover sourdough, and we're gonna cook up or bake up a applesauce crumble muffin. So let's start by getting our chicken kind of prepped to go into the oven to roast so that we can shred it for our soup. Now, ideally, you're gonna wanna use, you know, a chicken thigh or something with the skin on it, but we're just using chicken breasts today, just for the sake of what I have in the house. And I was really kind of craving a soup today. So I'm just going to make a couple like slits in my chicken. This is gonna allow it to kind of cook up a little bit faster in the oven so that we can shred it. And then I'm going to season it with some spices here. So I've got some fresh thyme from my garden. And I'm just gonna, you know, pull these leaves off and kind of sprinkle it over the chicken. Actually, let's pop our chicken into our baking dish here. Just go wash my hands real quick. Okay, and return. So I'm gonna sprinkle our fresh thyme. We're gonna also save fresh thyme to go into our soup. But this will just give our chicken a little bit of extra flavor as well. Do a couple more. There we go. So we've got our fresh thyme on there. I'm gonna do a little bit of garlic salt, a little bit of black pepper. And again, we're gonna be shredding up this chicken so it doesn't have to be glorious with its spicing. And then a little bit of lemon juice. That's just gonna help kind of, you know, break it down, make it nice and juicy. I'm gonna add a little bit of acidity to the soup when we put it in there. And of course, just a teeny little drizzle of olive oil. And that's just gonna give, because this is a chicken breast, a little bit more fat, so when we shred it up, it will have a little bit more flavor. So we're gonna pop this in the oven. I'm just gonna cook it at 350 because that's what our muffins are going to be cooking at in just a little bit, but I wanted to get a good start on it. So we're just gonna pop it in here. I'm gonna push it kind of towards the back, and we're just gonna let that cook up. And that's gonna cook for like about, 30 minutes or so, then we'll shred it and put it in our soup towards the end. But now, let's work on our muffins. So we're gonna do our applesauce muffins based with a crumb topping. So we're gonna start with our wet ingredients. We are going to be using a 1/2 cup of our sourdough discard in this recipe. And so I'm gonna pour this. There we go. So we'll add this into our bowl, and then we're gonna add in our butter and applesauce and eggs, and we'll start kind of mixing this up. Go. Slide this guy right over here. Then we're going to use, it's about a cup of applesauce. I'm going to be just using applesauce pouches because that's the applesauce I have in my house. I've got little kids. And I'm actually using the apple cinnamon one, but you can also use plain in here because we're gonna be adding a lot of spices in here, so that's not really gonna change much of the spice flavor to it. So plain or apple cinnamon for it. And we want about a cup of applesauce or 3 pouches.
You have a question? How long have you had Gus Gus?
Oh, Gus Gus. I've had Gus Gus, or my starter, since January. So I had a starter going before January, but I forgot to put him in the fridge before we went on vacation. And we were gone for 10 days on like a cruise, and he molded, so we had to start all over. But this one's been going strong. And he's been making some great delicious breads for us. Hence, we're actually going to be using some of our leftover sourdough from last night to go for our lunch today. Because I'm just craving a grilled cheese and soup. It's just one of those days. So I've got my butter in here, which was 1/4 cup of melted butter, and then 2 eggs. And then we got our cup of applesauce and a half a cup of our discard. So we're gonna mix these guys in. There we go. And I will say these are like a perfect like fall is coming muffin because they're going to be full of kind of that pumpkin spice, fall spices, but they're not pumpkin, they're applesauce. Okay, so we've got this mixed in. Now we're going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract. So we've got 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda, but I'm just going to use my smaller baking, or my half teaspoon for this because my 1 teaspoon is wet. So a teaspoon of baking soda, or 2 halves, and then we're going to use a half a teaspoon of salt. And then we're going to add in a whole tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice.
You have a question? Do you have all your discard recipes in a book or cookbook?
I do not have them in a cookbook, but we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of our recipes, you can just go there and then just find like the one, the things that we cooked in the title, and you can watch and cook along with those again. But we also have our members. We send out about we post 3 recipe cards a week for our members, which are all the different recipes that we make. So those take me a little bit longer to make, which is why, they're for our members only, but everybody can recreate my recipes from the videos. Okay, so we've got our whole tablespoon of our pumpkin pie spice in there. If your pumpkin pie spice is sitting in your pantry or your spice thing from last year, you might need to use a little bit more. Spices don't go bad over time, they just dull, which means they're just not going to be as fragrant and flavorful, and therefore you might need to use a little bit more to get that same flavor. Okay, we've got all of this mixed in. Now we're going to add in our sugar and then our flour. So this recipe, which also I think what makes it so kind of folly and delicious, is I'm using brown sugar. I don't use granulated sugar, I use brown sugar for this, and it just gives it that richer flavor. Since brown sugar has those kind of molasses, which I just feel like screams fall and winter. So we're gonna put in a whole cup of brown sugar. Press this guy in. And then I'm going to save this aside because we're going to use our brown sugar and our crumb topping. So we're going to mix this in, and then we'll add our flour in. But I'm not going to add the flour in yet because I want to make sure this sugar is fully mixed in. Because you don't want to over mix your muffins when you're making them. This is a butter-based dough, and over mixing them can lead to a stiff muffin. And we want it to be nice and soft and fluffy. Okay. So is looking beautiful. Now we're going to add in 1 cup of all-purpose flour. We'll mix this in, and then our base for our applesauce muffins is complete. And all we have to do is make our streusel topping, and then we can kind of assemble them to go into the oven. So we're just going to mix this up until it's just barely combined. Again, you don't want to overmix. Overmix will give you a firmer, stiffer muffin. There we go. So I'm just going to mix until that it's still going to be lumpy, but that white part of the flour is already mixed in there. There we go. So here is our lovely applesauce batter for our muffins, which is just that spice, the pumpkin pie spice is just going to be lovely for it. We'll spoon these in our muffins in just a second, but we're going to make our streusel topping to go on top. So we have 1/4 cup of melted butter, which is 4 tablespoons. I'm going to add this in here. And then we are going to start, let me grab a spoon. We're going to add in about 1/3 cup of brown sugar. So I'll mix this. And we're just essentially making kind of like a brown sugar paste right now. We'll add our flour in towards the end, but I find that it's easier to get that butter and the sugar mixed up well when they're when you mix them first. And then we're gonna add in about, I wanna say like a half a teaspoon of cinnamon. So just a little shake over, or you can measure it out if you want. This is gonna give us a nice kind of cinnamon taste to our crumb topping on top, which will also just add a little more spice to these. And then we're gonna add in our flour. I'm gonna start with about a half a cup of flour we're gonna move from like a half a cup to, it's gonna probably end up around 3/4. But I always mix it and then just stop when I see my good crumb form. You just don't want it to be too dry of a crumb, because you want thicker crumbs, but you also don't want it to be too thick. So you kind of want that kind of crumbly where it holds together, but it's not like one big blob. Okay. So I start mixing it with my fingers a little bit to get it there. So right now it's a little still too kind of wet, so I'm gonna add maybe a tablespoon more. Just add a little bit at a time until you get the right texture. Here we go. This is just about perfect. Where if you were to push it together, it would form a big clump, but it naturally kind of falls apart. Like kinetic sand if you have kids. Now, let's move this to the side. And let's build our muffins, and then we'll put our crumb topping on top. You could also add in, you know, a little bit of some oats in there if you wanted to have a little bit of an oaty crust, or some chopped nuts if you wanted to spice things up. So let's put our little muffin wrappers in. I was like, I knew I had enough in here.
Marla just sent you a gift.
Well, thank you, Mara. We appreciate that here. Okay, let's get our muffin thing. I'm actually going to switch to, oh, I have my metal spoon over here. Good. I'll just use this one. I find it's easier to fill up my muffin tins using a metal spoon than it is my big silicone spatula. So we're going to fill it up. I'm going to first go through, give everyone a good scoop, and then we'll even it out. I just find it's easier to make it even if I give everyone a little bit first and then fill back through. I like to fill my muffins all the way up to the top as high as possible so that I get a bigger dome on it. Now this recipe makes makes a dozen muffins. Now you could stretch it a little bit more if you wanted to make smaller muffins, but I find a dozen is just perfect for this, as I, of course, get it everywhere. And then we'll go back over and fill it up nice and high. But this is just going to have just those kind of those fall spices, apple cider kind of taste to it, which will be lovely, especially because I feel like fall is beckoning. Everywhere I go, I'm seeing Halloween decorations being put up and sold everywhere. And my kids are back in school. And for me, once you're back in school, summer's over. And so I'm ready for it. I'm ready for cooler weather, especially here in Tennessee. It's been very, very hot recently. Although today it cooled off and it's just in the 80s outside. But we had like in the high 90s, just a couple days ago. Okay, just about kind of get all of these filled up as high, just fill them up as high as you can to the top. That way you'll get that nice kind of dome on them, which is really the best part of the muffin. Okay. Wash. Now we are going to add our crumb topping over the top of them. And if you don't want the crumb topping, these will bake at 350 for about 20 minutes. But with the crumble topping, they're just going to need about 1 to 2 minutes more because it just takes a little bit longer because the crumb topping kind of acts like insulation. It helps kind of weigh them down, keep it in, which means it just needs a smidge longer to cook. We're just gonna kind of pile it on there. And this again is what makes it so delicious, which will be lovely. So, and this will kind of be a perfect little treat with our chicken stellini soup and our triple grilled cheeses.
You have a question? Can you use dark brown sugar?
You can use dark brown sugar. It actually will complement the spices in here well. It's gonna give you more of a molasses flavor to your end product. But yes, it will just play great with this. Here we go. Okay, let's go pop these guys in the oven and we'll set our timer. So again, these are gonna just take a smidge longer to bake than if you were to not do the streusel topping on it. I've made these before where I did a cinnamon brown sugar glaze. But we're gonna pop our applesauce muffins into the oven with our streusel topping. And we'll just put them right next to our chicken that is baking up for our chicken stellini soup. And I'm gonna set my timer to 20 minutes. And it's gonna bake at 350 for 20 minutes. And then it'll be perfect.
You got a comment that they love your kitchen?
Oh, thank you. I actually designed this kitchen about 2 years ago. And I have been loving it ever since. If you would have seen my kitchen before, it was tiny and small. You can actually see where it ended. So this beam right here ended the room, and then there's a beam right above our island. My kitchen was this tiny little rectangle, and it was in like a 1970s layout. I mean, it had been updated when we bought the house, but we are a big family and it was just not cutting it. And so, best decision I ever made, I decided to steal half of our formal dining room because who uses a formal dining room anymore? And so now we have our big table that seats like 14, but it takes up a fraction of our space.
Gorgeous table.
Gorgeous table. My husband built the table for us. Next time we go pull out the muffins, I'll let you guys take a closer look at it. But yes, he built it from scratch and it is amazing. And it's perfect for our family because we're a family of, 7, and I always sit there, and then my parents and all that, but I think of, when my kids are older and they'll have, their spouses, we'll all be at the big table and my grandchildren will be around in the kitchen nook and at the island. These romantic ideations of how it's going to be later on in life, but I'm preparing for the future. But I will say, I have loved my kitchen remodel since then. It was a complete surprise. It was literally the day before school started 2 years ago. We woke up for water coming out from underneath our cabinets. And a pipe had bust into our wall. And the only way to get to it was to rip out the cabinets, and the backsplash and the countertops, of course, broke when you ripped everything up. And then we found mold. So everything had to go. But it was a blessing in disguise because I got a beautiful kitchen out of it. And I got it designed the way I like it, which it's funny because it's like a mesh between a galley style kitchen, but then you have it open. So I have this really wide opening here, which I love because if you're cooking or doing, unloading or doing dishes, you don't have people on top of you. So I really like it, the space, especially since our kitchen is kind of like the focal spot in our house because, I cook a lot of homemade food for my family. Okay, we cut up 1 yellow onion and we add it in here. We're going to saute it.
You have a question? Do you have any tips to keep onions from burning your eyes?
So, we have that same problem here. I keep my onions in the fridge, and I find that they aren't as fragrant and they don't make my eyes burn as much when I keep them in the fridge versus if I have kept them in the pantry. And I know there's whole don't keep them in the fridge. I said, I keep my onions in the fridge and they do just fine. Now, granted, I go through my onions really, really fast. And, I go through probably 10 plus onions a week. So I'm constantly buying and replacing them. but I find it doesn't, they don't sting quite as much. Now, my husband, on the other hand, anytime I cut up an onion, oh, it gets to him really, really fast, though. I've read so many things about, have like a bowl of water out, and the onion things likes to go to liquid and whatnot, but that doesn't work.
There's an interesting one. Cut an apple in half and leave it where you're cutting.
I've never heard that one, but maybe I'll
Should try it.
I always just tell my husband I just need to get him some safety goggles so he can just, have his goggles on while he cooks. Onions didn't used to bother us as much, but we had LASIK. I had LASIK and my husband had LASIK, a long time ago. But I will say they're more sensitive since having LASIK to just certain things. Okay, we've got our little carrots here, and we're actually going to kind of dice them up small in here because for this soup, think about like a pastini, but we're doing it with stelline, which is very similar to pastini, but they're just little bitty stars, hence stelline, which is like little stars in Italian. But we're going to use that instead of pastini, which are like more like little balls, because that's what I had, and I was kind of craving this soup. It's also called like Italian penicillin, because this is like a great soup if you're not feeling well or whatnot. It's just good for you. Though if you're gonna make it, if you're not feeling well, you're gonna wanna use like a chicken thighs with the skin on to make your broth, because that's gonna give you just more of those antioxidants and flavors and delicious. But we're just being practical here today. Okay, let's get our onions cooking up. And then I'm gonna get my carrots here chopped up. I'm gonna kind of cut them all in half, and then we will start kind of dicing them up. I actually might quarter some of them, because again, I want them to be smaller little bits. I want everything to really be like kind of the size of the pasta. So it's just like, almost like, you have those chopped salads. Think of it like a chopped soup. And that way it's just, you get lots of little bits of everything in every bite. There we go. And then we'll cut up celery. And then I'm gonna throw in a little bit of kale, just to add a little bit of more green. And, because I feel like kale is just such a great thing to add into a soup that gives you more veggies, but I don't feel like it has a very strong flavor or alters your flavor of it. Just gives you a little bit more veggie. And kale, unlike spinach, holds its shape much better in soups. Spinach tends to wilt and gets kind of soggy. Okay, we've got our carrots here. And once my onions start to get a little bit opaque, or not, get a little bit translucent, right now they're still opaque, then we'll add in our carrots. But again, onions need a little bit of time on their own to kind of cook up. Then we'll add our carrots in. And the reason why I'm sauteing all of my vegetables up before, instead of just kind of throwing it into the pot, is because, I'm gonna where this is again, they are gonna get more flavor out of them, and you're gonna create a better broth with it versus just throwing everything in the pot with your broth. And your vegetables they're not gonna give it the right flavors. So this is gonna give you just a much better flavor to everything. So again, I'm gonna kind of cut my celery up into kind of smaller pieces, just kind of like my carrots here. And then we'll dice it up. Again, I want nice small pieces of my vegetables so that they really blend well with our stelline, the star pasta that we're going to be using. Now, lovely. Now that my onions are starting to get translucent, they're getting a little bit of golden color, we are going to add in our carrots. We're gonna let them cook up for a second, then we'll add in our celery. But I always like to let each vegetable just have a little bit of minute on there and before I put in. I always start with onions because onions are a vegetable that really needs a moment with them for themselves in the pan to really bring out their nice flavors. And then I go from firmest vegetable down to softest, and then kind of also the juiciest last. So I'm using carrots, and then I'll do celery. But then if I had like mushrooms, or I do peppers next, and then mushrooms, and then like zucchini, and then last a tomato, if I were gonna use all of those in here. And that's just so that you can get a good saute on all of your veggies. Okay, let me grab a big thing so we can start making our broth. I'm gonna get 4 cups of water. And then we're going to be using some chicken bouillon to flavor it up. I prefer to use chicken bouillon over like chicken broth, because I can add more bouillon to get more flavor. Because I feel, unless you're making your own chicken broth, I feel like store-bought broth is so bland, which is why I prefer using the bouillon, or I really like the bouillon paste. So we're going to start. I'm gonna do a nice, really big spoonful in here for my 4 cups. And this is what's gonna pretty much add the saltiness to our soup, as well as give us that really good, kind of chicken flavor, especially since we're using a chicken breast over a chicken thigh. Okay, let's add our celery in here now. And then we're gonna let it saute up, and then we're gonna add a little bit of tomato paste and our bay leaves, and then our thyme in there, so that it can cook up and add like just lovely flavors to our soup. So I've got fresh thyme. I also have fresh parsley, but we will add our fresh parsley at the very, very end because we don't want it to wilt and lose up all of its flavors. Parsley is definitely, it's a great herb, but if you cook it, it loses all of its flavor. So it's one that you want to really add at the very end when you're done cooking, to add that little fresh kind of bit of flavor. Versus the thyme I'm going to add now, because it's going to let out that flavor and really have it pop. There we go. So let's get all of that. We're going to kind of take off these little itty bitty baby leaves. And that's just, it's fine if you have some of the little bits of stalk, or like the stalks or like twigs, but you want the big one to be gone, because otherwise you're going to have like a twig in your soup. There we go. And luckily they're really not that hard to kind of de-leaf here. You just kind of pull gently along and the leaves fall off. And there really is no better way to do it than to just do it with your fingers. I used to have like one of those things where you could, thread the little, branch through, a little circle, and it would pull it off for you, but then you're doing all that work to like thread it. Okay, we're gonna just give this a nice little mince up. This is gonna be about a teaspoon of fresh thyme. If you're gonna use dried thyme, you're gonna wanna use maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon. You just need a little bit less. Dried herbs tend to pack more of a punch because there's actually more of them, but when they've dehydrated, they take up less space. Okay, let's add in our teaspoon of fresh thyme in here. I'm gonna give this a nice little stir. And then I'm gonna add in about a tablespoon of tomato paste. Now, growing up, tomato paste was always in like one of those little small containers. Now you can buy it in like a tube, which is great, because most of the time when you use tomato paste, you don't need a whole lot. So it's kind of perfect, because then I can just keep it in my fridge. So if you use it, I recommend getting a tube like that for it. But we're going to stir our tomato base in here, and this is going to be kind of the base for our pastini. This is kind of called a mirepoix. But this is going to add a nice rich vegetable flavor. And then you have, of course, those little bits of veggies in our soup. And this will be for our chicken. I always keep saying pastini, but it's chicken stelline, because we're using little stars. as our pasta instead of the little balls. And then I'm going to take 2 bay leaves, and we're gonna add this into our soup, but I want these flavors to come out a little bit faster, so I'm going to actually crush them up, and that way there's gonna be more breaks on the herb, and it will get nice and flavorful in there. When you crush it up nice and small, you're not gonna notice it. You know, typically you leave your bay, you know, if you're stewing for a long time, you'll leave your bay leaf whole and then you can pull it out because it doesn't ever get soft, it's a firm one. But when you crush it up like this, those are just gonna taste like any, you know, dried spice, you know, for it. But it's gonna give a lot of great flavor. Okay, let's add a little bit of pepper, and then we will start adding in our broth. So I'm gonna do about a ½ teaspoon of pepper, so a couple little pinches here. I'm adding back over here. And I'm gonna give it again a little stir up now, and then we're gonna slowly add in our broth, which I'm gonna use it first to kind of deglaze the bottom of my pan. So I'm gonna add just a little bit in and kind of scrape up any of those spices, seasoned bits in there, because that's really gonna add flavor and body to our soup. And with the tomato paste, you wanna let it kind of saute up just a second, you know, before you add your broth in. That just is going to allow those flavors to set and get a little bit more rich.
You have a question? Did you bake up the sourdough that you made last night?
I did. I baked it up. We're actually going to be using part of it to make our triple grilled cheese. Oh, the one I made up. No. We baked up a sourdough last night. We're going to bake up our sourdough at dinner tonight. We made last night, we prepped a Parmesan, Parmesan, black pepper, and rosemary loaf. I couldn't remember what spice I used. We prepped that last night, and it's cold proofing in my fridge right now. And so tonight we'll bake it up. I always like to do that during our dinner time because my kids love fresh baked bread right out of the oven. And if I bake it up right now, they won't get it because they're at school. Okay, let's give this a nice little stir. And we're gonna let those kind of flavors marry together. Once we get a nice little boil to this, we're gonna throw in our Stelline, which is our star pasta, and let it kind of cook up in the soup. But I'm going to chop up my kale to go in here, and then the bottom parts of my green onions, we're gonna throw in the bright green parts of my green onions towards the end. Because with green onions, the white part I feel needs to be cooked up longer because it's got a stronger flavor, a bit more astringent. But the top green parts are better to be thrown in at the very end, just kind of like parsley. Because if you cook it too long, it loses its flavor, it gets mushy, so it's one that kind of you want to put in at the end. But the bottom parts stay firmer and are better to have like in their cooking.
Do you have any Rice Krispie treats left?
We do. We're about halfway through, and that was my son Torrin. He had like 4 last night, and I said, you gotta wait up. These have got to make 2 lunch days. Because tomorrow's Friday. I'm like, I want them to be in your lunchbox for Friday too, so I don't have to prep another thing before. But I don't think they'll make it past tomorrow, and that's only, I don't think they'll make it past tonight, but I'm gonna make sure I reserve 3 of them for my kids' lunches. Okay, I've got my kale. I'm gonna chop this up right here, nice and fine, because again, we chopped up our vegetables nice and little. I want my kale to also be nice and little. And we are going to throw it in now because kale is more kind of like cabbage in the sense that it's not going to wilt in our soup. It's going to keep its shape and body, and you want it to cook a little bit so it gets nice and tender. So we've got our kale going in there, which will be delicious. And now let's prep up our grilled cheeses to start cooking those. And our muffins should be coming out here in just a second. Okay, about 2 minutes left on our muffins, our applesauce streusel, our applesauce muffins with streusel topping. But here is the, I would say about a third of our sourdough loaf left over from last night. So we're gonna be using this to make our grilled cheese. It's nice and lovely and soft, as you can see, and it's going to make the best grilled cheeses. Let me grab my soft butter. And one of the reasons why I like to bake it up, and you see I leave it as a more blonde, is because when you cook it to a really dark crust, that crust, especially the next day, kind of turns rock hard, and then you have a really like crunchy bit. I like to keep mine nice and soft. I'm going to first even out my loaf here. My mom came by this morning, like I always watch her dog while she goes to work, and she stole some sourdough bread this morning. Of course, she always comes and eats it, and she did not cut it evenly, so we will even it out because I try to make them as even as I possibly can without being too thick. That way they'll get a nice kind of good edge kind of cooking up for it. Well, let's see. And make 2 good sized grilled cheeses out of this. And we'll have a little bit left over, which will be great for dipping into our soup, so. Delicious. Now with sourdough, there's kind of like the rule of thumb that the first 2 days, like after making it, you can eat it as bread, but that 3rd day, it's gotta be toast. It gets a little firm up after that. We're gonna grab our muffins out here. So let's head there and we'll grab them out. Remember, we've got our sourdough discard applesauce muffins with our pumpkin pie spice in it. And then of course it's got a lovely streusel topping on it. So look at that, looking good. I'm gonna just give them a nice tap, see if they're nice and firm on the top, and they are. So we're gonna take them out. Oh, and I said you guys can look at the table my husband made, which is right here with our giant, of course, skeleton head. I told you Halloween's everywhere. But he made this by hand himself. It is a 10-foot table. And the best part is that table only cost us $300 to make versus the one that I wanted to get was almost $5,000. So.
And the banquet.
Oh yes, and he built the banquet seating around. I love banquet seating. We have it in our like more casual dining over here. But you know, it's like when you go to a restaurant, you want to sit in a booth. I want to sit in banquet seating. Okay, there is our delicious applesauce muffins. This is our lovely crumb topping on the top. You can see you get lots of that top, that gel on there, which is going to be delicious. And they're full of pumpkin spice and has a ½ cup of our sourdough discard in it. Let's put since our soup right here is definitely popping, which is a nice thing about cooking in a Dutch oven. It really retains that heat. We're going to add in our pasta. Now, this is one of those things where you don't want to add too much or you're going to have like hardly any of your broth left. So I'm going to add about, 3/4 of a cup in here. It's like orzo in the sense that it's going to grow when you boil it. I'm going to add just a smidge more. Here we go. And we're gonna let that boil. It takes about 8 or so minutes for it to get nice and soft and tender. But the nice thing is it's going to really soak up those flavors of our pasta, our broth in there. While we're doing that, let's get our grilled cheeses prepped and ready. And we'll start shredding our chicken to go into our soup as well. And soon it will be time to eat lunch.
I got a question. What kind of pasta was that?
That was stelline, which are little stars. Think of chicken and stars. But stelline sounds a little bit more grown up than chicken and stars. But it's very similar to like pastini, which is, the Italian soup they always call like Italian penicillin. But it's just a little, little teeny pasta. So you'll have these little itty bitty noodles in there, which I think goes along great for how we cut up our veggies and nice like a finer dice to them. Okay, we're starting, this is our 3 grilled cheese. We're starting with Havarti. So I'm gonna just kind of spread. this out. And then one like tip for making grilled cheeses, especially with the sourdough, is you don't want to overload them with too much like meat and cheese in there that it takes forever to melt and you're kind of crushed up. But don't make your cheese go over the edge or it will just kind of burn down on your pan. The next cheese we're going to use is some Gouda. We'll use our slices here. And also, if you're going to use cold meats in it, again, don't layer it too thick or your cheese will like never melt. Trying to use, there we go. And these are good sized grilled cheeses, by the way. And then our last cheese, we're doing kind of like the creamier cheeses, is a little bit of Munster, which is our softest of the cheese, which is going to give us kind of the best cheese pull on it. But both Havarti and Gouda have really good melting points, meaning you're going to get that epic kind of cheese pull when you cut the grilled cheese apart.
Hey, you have a question? Does your husband cook?
My husband does not cook. And I think it's one of those things where if he had to learn to cook, he would. But we all do things better, and I prefer him doing all of my honey-do projects and doing the dishes because I cook and he cleans. And I think that's the best deal ever because I enjoy cooking. I do not enjoy cleaning. So it's a win-win for here. Let's get our chicken cooking here. I'm going to give my soup a little stir because I don't want any of my little Stelline stars to kind of stick up. And then we're going to shred our chicken. And I've got my grilled cheese.
You have a question? What's the seasoning for the chicken?
The chicken, I kept it super, super simple. We've got fresh thyme, lemon juice, pepper, garlic salt, and a little bit of olive oil on here. And we're going to take it out. Okay, it's not too hot now. And then I'm going to try to shred it up as best as possible. Because for this soup, you want shredded chicken. You don't want to have chopped chicken. That's why I roasted it in the oven. So I'm just using kind of 2 forks to really claw it apart to give you that nice shredded chicken. You could also, like, if you're at Costco, just buy some rotisserie chicken there. You know, they always, the prepackaged shredded rotisserie chicken. A lot of times I have that on hand, which is really great if you want to make like a soup really fast in there. Now, if you want this to be like your comfort, whatever, like I'm not feeling good soup, what you want to use is actually chicken thighs. So I would use probably 4 chicken thighs or 2 and then a split breast if you want a little bit more meat. Those chicken thighs are going to give you a richer, more fatty broth, which is just going to make you feel better. It's going to give it a more velvety texture to your soup. But here...
Have you ever heard of using a hand blender to shred it?
Yes, I have. Most of the time, I don't shred my chicken. I just buy rotisserie chicken from Costco. That's the pre-shredded, so I don't have to do all that much. So it's one of those things where I don't necessarily like need it. And I'm a great collector of kitchen gadgets that sit collecting on dust. That was kind of my new thing. I started like a year and a half ago that I wasn't gonna buy any more kitchen gadgets unless I had thought over them and needed them for a long time, because I've got everything under the sun sitting outside in my garage on shelves. I've got, a bread maker, a dehydrator, a marinator, which vacuum seals and sucks the juices in. All delicious things. And then all, the waffle makers and all that jazz. Okay, we're gonna do our first flip. Now, the way I cook my sourdough grilled cheeses is I do 2 flips. So the first one is to warm up the bread and get the cheese starting to melt. And then the second round is getting that, like the cheese melted and the golden crisp on it. Okay, now I'm gonna take my chicken that I shredded here. I'm gonna throw them back into this pan that has all of our good juices in it. And that's just gonna give our chicken a little bit more flavor. And then we'll pop it in our soup towards the end. Okay. But again, this has that lemon juice, that olive oil in it, that fresh thyme and black pepper. So it's just gonna flavor our chicken a little bit more. There we go. So I'll have that to go in when we're ready. Let me taste, let me give this a little swirl, and then I'm gonna taste my broth and see if I need to add any more spices to our soup. Okay. Perfect, I don't need to add anything else. You know, sometimes if you need to add a little bit more, you know, salt or pepper to it, I always wanna taste. But using like the better than bouillon, like the chicken bouillon, I don't have to add any additional salt because that's already gonna get the saltiness, but it's also gonna give you that savory flavor from the chicken as well. Okay. This is just about done, so let's kind of prep up our herbs here in just a second, but let's give our grilled cheeses. Now we're gonna start the melting process. So we're already starting to, and then we're gonna cook them again on each side until they're crispy golden brown. But the reason again why I do the double flips instead of just one side is sourdough bread is a lot thicker. And so it needs longer to heat up. And if you try to cook it on one side, you're not gonna get that melty cheese on the inside that you want, or you're gonna burn up your bread. So now I'm gonna turn it down to about a 3, and we're gonna let those crisp up. But let's get our fresh herbs kind of chopped up to add in here. This is just gonna add a really nice flavor to our soup at the very end. I'm just gonna give this a nice little stir, but here, now that you can see the stars, but we got our little teeny tiny stars in there for it. So just like little itty bitty bits of pasta. And it just is like it's different from chicken noodle soup, but at the same time, similar.
Do you know what's for dinner yet?
I know that we'll be having sourdough bread. I have yet to kind of figure out exactly what we're going to have for dinner tonight. So I'm still thinking it through. I'm not, part of me wants to do one thing, but then it doesn't really go well for sourdough. I was thinking about doing Spam fried rice with beef and broccoli, so like a teriyaki beef and broccoli. But sourdough bread doesn't really go with Asian food. But I'm sure my husband is like, I love that meal, we want to have that. So I might do that tonight. Or I might do something like a pasta, which I always feel like goes really well with sourdough bread, since we kind of had, last night was pork chops, mashed potatoes, and green beans. I always like to try to break up and not do like 2 pastas in a row for like dinner or whatnot, although my kids could eat pasta every single day. My husband does not care for pasta as much. He'll eat the sourdough and the protein for it. Okay, we've got our parsley and our green onions up. There we go. We're gonna add our chicken in just a second, but I wanna see how these are toasting up. Ooh, we're getting there, getting a nice, lovely, crispy toast on them. Beautiful. Okay, where is... And I'm just gonna do this, and this is going to help that cheese melt a little bit faster. Let's add our chicken in now, because as you can see, the pasta is just about cooked now. Almost all of it is filling up with the stars as they're expanding, which is why I said you don't want to add too much pasta to it. I only used about 3/4 of a cup, because if you like pour that whole bag in there, what you're gonna have is pasta instead of a soup. Okay. It's always like if you ever make like chicken and rice soup, adding in that rice, and if you think, oh, this much, but then it just keeps expanding. My actually favorite way to make like a chicken and rice soup is I cook the rice separately, and then you put a scoop of the rice in the bowl, and then you ladle the soup over it, which keeps the soup from the rice from getting soggy. There we go. So we've got our chicken in there. We're gonna let that kind of soak up those flavors. There we go. And let's get this flip. And flip, you can see our cheeses are starting to melt here, which is great. And this is just about done. Let's add in our green onions. And again, we add our spices in at the very end, because if you add our fresh herbs in here too soon, they'll wilt and all of their fresh flavor goes away. And then you just have, you know, bland greenness. Okay, let me wash my hands because they're covered in parsley. And we're gonna get just about ready to serve up here. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off. Let me grab my Parmesan cheese because I love to sprinkle Parmesan cheese over the top of the soup and make it delicious. Get my little cauldron here. And let's slide this over out of the way. Get our beautiful grilled cheese, lovely. Okay, slide this here. And I'm gonna grab a ladle and we'll be ready to serve up. Okay, so we're gonna do our soup first. For our soup, we have our chicken and stelline soup, which has stelline, which is a star-shaped pasta. We have minced up diced up carrots, onions, celery, a little bit of kale in there, and then we made a rich broth using a little bit of tomato paste. We have fresh thyme, and then of course our baked shredded chicken, so absolutely delicious. And then to really take it over the edge, just sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan cheese over the top. The steam is going to melt it, and it's going to cause it to get nice and gooey on top of it. Here we've got our delicious sourdough grilled cheese, and of course, we're gonna kind of put it in there, but we've got, you see all that cheese just ready to ooze out. And let's not forget our streusel applesauce muffin made using our sourdough discard. And I just want to show you guys how soft and tender the insides of these muffins are. But just look at that, how beautiful, delicious, and full of pumpkin spice flavors. Well guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we have chicken stelline pasta, triple grilled cheese, and applesauce streusel muffins. And we also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in there. We've got my hex-clad griddle pan, my Le Creuset, my cutting boards, my knives, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.